sejam muito bem-vindos à Univesp e hoje nós temos um momento muito especial, mas antes de eu falar sobre o que vai acontecer, vou fazer uma breve audiodescrição. Eu tenho aqui na minha frente as câmeras, os microfones, toda a equipe técnica da nossa Univesp TV. Eu sou uma mulher branca, alta, com os cabelos encaracolados, com algumas mechas um pouco mais claras. Eu estou de tênis, calça preta, uma blusa preta e um blazer claro. E aqui ao meu lado esquerdo e atrás de mim a gente tem toda a equipe da Univesp. Sentadinho bem do meu lado esquerdo a gente tem o professor Marcos Borges, que é o presidente da Univesp, tá? E depois todo o nosso time. Bom, agora que eu já fiz a audiodescrição, vamos falar sobre um pouquinho o que vai acontecer nessa nossa dinâmica. Hoje nós temos o prazer de falar aqui com o professor pesquisador Grisha Liebel, da Universidade de Reykjavik, right? Correct? Que fica na Islândia. E nós vamos fazer uma dinâmica que é a seguinte. Ele vai falar em inglês, nós vamos interagir com ele também. Aí nós teremos toda a parte de tradução e legendagem. Ele vai contar um pouquinho sobre a experiência dele, sobre as pesquisas e o trabalho e falaremos também um pouquinho sobre dessa nossa movimentação, a Univesp Internacional. Pois é. Então, vamos começar? Are you ready, Grisha?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for being here with us, okay? And I know that you understand a little bit of Portuguese, you speak Spanish and everything, so now it's up to you. So we are eager over here to see what you have to show us. Thank you so much.
Okay, let's see what I'll show you then.
Okay,
well,
let's go.
Welcome. As you see, I'm just having a white screen. I'll draw a little bit, and I'll just talk about 3 different topics. That's what we discussed beforehand. And these are topics that are primarily in education, but I'm doing research on them, I'm using them in my classroom, so it's really a mix of different things. And it's essentially 3 different things I'll be talking about, and some of them are a bit connected, and a lot of them are not really. The first one is on the topic of project-based learning. And you see that my handwriting is not fantastic. It's a lot worse than my English. So how about using projects in the classroom in different courses? The other topic is about teaching in a team. So in contrast to the classical lectures where you have one person giving courses, giving lectures with multiple people, and how you can do that in a good way. And we have both used this in the classroom in the past, but we've also done some research on the topic. And then finally, I'll talk a bit about work that I'm actually mainly at the moment doing on neurodiversity, so dealing with students that have different cognitive function and how to include them, maybe how to better use their strength and so on. On the last topic, I think I have to say that, as I said, this is ongoing work, so there's a good chance there might be some in the room that are actually better at that than I am, so it's really just an insight on what I'm doing. And please interrupt me whenever you feel like, if there are any questions. I'm not only here to talk all the time, so go ahead if you have any questions. So project-based learning, the first topic, is something that we have been using, I have personally been using for over 10 years now. It's become very, very popular in Europe, in the US, in different universities. But I also have to say that it's not like everyone uses it everywhere. That's definitely not the case. So we have a lot of these traditional lectures where 300 students, 400 students, and there's just someone lecturing. But what we very often want to do is we want to have groups of students, in many cases, that somehow work together. They work together on one problem. And the reason why we want to do that is pretty much the reality in whatever you do afterwards. There are very few professions left where you are alone. And that's why we want to expose students to the real world, and we put them in different groups. And there are, of course, there are lots of different ways, methods of doing this. I'll just, since we don't have, I could speak 90 minutes about just this, but just to talk a bit about how I usually approach this. So usually I start with a very good idea I have. So I might have an idea for a project. I'm teaching a class, for example, on software projects, and I have an idea, this is what I want to do. I think this would be a really nice project to do in a group. Or I start from what we call the learning outcomes. So thinking about what do I have to teach the students and how can I put that into the project. So usually I come from one of these two sides and try to figure out what exactly is it that I try to teach the students, what should they be doing in a project. And based on these different things, based on the idea I'm having, based on the learning, I try to design what exactly the students should be doing, and much more important, what the students should not be doing. And for those of you here or the ones watching this, I think the biggest problem that I see when teachers do project-based learning for the first time is that they go too far into the realistic corner. So they say, we do something very realistic, and you throw all the difficult things at them at the same time, and the students are just very confused. So usually you have to have a good idea, you have to have an idea what students want to learn, and then you need to be very, very careful how you control everything else. So just as an example, I'm teaching classes on software engineering, and I'm teaching the students, for example, different methods to do that. I teach them things like how to estimate, how they can plan ahead, how long things will take, and so on. What I don't want to teach them in my class is a lot about programming. Because there are other classes, for example, where they learn programming, where they maybe learn very detailed things. That's not part of my class. So my project usually is very restrictive on how much time they should spend programming. What other teachers, what I've seen, what others do is very often that they say, let's do a real software project. And then all the students do is programming. That's all they focus on. But it's actually not at all what I want them to learn. So I think, you know, if I summarize in 5 minutes, if you want to do project-based learning, what to look at is what should the students learn, but in particular, much more important, what should they not learn? What do you need to take away so that the things don't go too far in one direction? So I think this is really the balance. And then the other thing is a lot of us teachers, educators, we like our traditional lectures because we have a lot of control over what is happening. We can design exactly what's happening. We can design all the assignments. In project-based learning, you should expect that you have some kind of iterations. You should expect some kind of chaos. All right, the pen is stopping. You should expect that the first round things go horribly wrong, and you'll have to do it again, and you'll have changes. So what I often do, I do this because my class is on software, and this is how software is developed, but usually I try to do some kind of iterative work. So the students work for 2 weeks, they deliver something, then they work for 2 weeks, and so on. And the great thing about this framework is, well, it fits for the software context, but also it allows the students to make mistakes. They can learn from it. They can do things again. It's not the classical idea where you do one assignment, now you go to the next topic. Forget all about the first one. But there should be some kind of repetition. And as a teacher, this means you also have a chance to fix things. You realize the first 2 weeks something is horribly wrong, and then you fix it in the next round, or you make it slightly better. But in terms of mindset, you need to go a bit away from the idea that everything will be great the first time. It will not, and that's okay. That's also part of here, the real world, right? Things are not always ideal. Just to sum this up, of course, this is a very quick run through, but we have done this in a lot of different courses. We have done this also a lot with companies, for example, that they come in and support us and give us problems or talk to the students. So it's a very flexible way. It's also something that has been done internationally between universities, that students work with students from other countries. Because again, many projects we have at the moment in software, but also in construction, in other areas are international. So it's part of the real experience to actually talk to different people and have different backgrounds. Yes, a question.
In terms of time,
yeah.
How long does it take when you start from the beginning up to the end, a new project?
For me to design or for the students to do?
The whole thing.
Okay.
When they, let's for you to design, okay, but then when they start, because we have your preparation and then you have the class, let's say like this, the project itself.
I would say it depends on how experienced you are in doing that. If you do it the first time, it will take you a long time to prepare. I think if I do a project in a topic that I'm very familiar with, I can easily set that up in 2 weeks.
Okay.
So that's not, I don't think the preparations are much longer than for having assignments or an exam. It's similar things.
Okay.
And then for students, the idea is usually that it should be a prolonged time. Because again, that's more realistic.
Okay.
The other extreme is putting people in a room for an exam for 40 minutes or so.
Okay.
So it should be prolonged. In my case, I usually do 10 weeks.
Okay.
Because our term is 12 weeks.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of time in the beginning, there's a bit in the end, and then there's 10 weeks of project work.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think you can do this very different. I know that, for example, in the UK, they have these capstone projects that run an entire year.
Okay.
So, you can do this probably from 4 weeks, so you can even do very mini projects.
Ours, it's about around 20 weeks, right? It's, yeah, that's what we do. That's why I asked you, because we can do something shorter or longer. Yeah. And how many hours per week of study do they have?
In our case, the students take 4 courses in parallel. That's full-time studies. Okay. So they are somewhere to 10 to 12 hours per course per week. Okay. And then in my class, there are some hours for lecturing or things like that. So I would expect they spend somewhere between 5 to 8 hours a week on the project. Okay, 5 to 8 hours a week. If they spend the time they should.
Okay, thank you.
Always the question. Any more questions on the project-based part? I think there are a lot of really good...
Traduz, okay, a question here. Yeah. Vamos devagar.
No Brasil, a gente tem uma cultura pouco mais tradicional.
In Brazil, do you understand?
I understood that, yes.
Okay, just go. If you don't, you ask me, okay? Yeah, okay. Fala devagar que ele entende.
Vamos lá. No Brasil, nós temos uma cultura educacional mais tradicional. E alguns alunos, diante dessa autonomia ou dessa necessidade de estudar por tanto tempo, sentem uma certa resistência. Como você faz para quebrar isso dentro dessas 20 semanas? Vamos pelo caminho do não. Como que você lida naquele pool de alunos, 10 alunos, 8 alunos, 2, 3 que não desempenham corretamente o projeto? Como você volta para resgatar esses alunos?
So, this is a mix also in Germany. So, for example, I'm from Germany originally. We have, well, this is now 15 years ago. I don't know how it's looking now, but 15 years ago, pretty much all of my courses were traditional. I was sitting in the lecture hall, I was listening, and then I was doing an assignment at home. And I've seen similar things, for example, in Spain and in Portugal. I think it's, one thing is actually just doing it. I think you'd be surprised how adaptable a lot of the young students are. And the other thing is, well, maybe calling it scaffolding, and this is something in the Univesp context that might be tricky, that they might need a lot of support in the beginning to get going. That it's just, a little bit of push. There is a teacher or there's someone that says, oh, have you worked on this? Maybe working with deliverables or things they have to do. That instead of just saying, well, now you're free, go ahead. You have certain things that they have to hand in or present or so. And this is, of course, a problem if you have lots and lots of students, how exactly to do that. But I think that those kind of things you need to work with. And it's very similar if you think about industrial projects. You also, in a lot of cases, it's not just like, okay, in 3 years you deliver the building, but there are things in between, right? And that's maybe the way for some people to make companies work. I think it's similar with students, but it's certainly not easy when you have very large courses. I can see that.
Okay.
Let's go to the other side of the question. But with the majority of the students, they prefer this kind of teaching? Do you think they like this? How they?
Generally, I think most students like it, yes. My own view, since most of my education was in Germany and then I came to Sweden where we did this model pretty much all of the time, I think a mix is good. As I said in the beginning, it's not like you have to do this in every single course. I think there are courses, I'm not 100% sure how I would do this in a class on calculus, for example. So there are cases where traditional lecturing might make a lot of sense, or maybe a few projects. There are cases like software development where it's really important to have these kind of experiences. So I think that the easy answer is always it depends. I think you need a mix of these. And students are different. The majority likes these, I would say. Yeah.
How do you evaluate the students? Like they have to deliver something or?
Yeah, we do. Let's use a different slide for that. I usually use rubric-based evaluation. So there are different kind of criteria they have to fulfill. And usually, this is quite a mix. Some of these have levels that talk about, I don't know, deliver something, deliver, for example, a plan for your project. Deliver, I don't know, set up some kind of software, write tests for your software. Again, this is now in the software context. And then some of these checks are just, have they done it or not? Is it there, is it not there? Very basic. Others can be a bit more qualitative. So for example, well, they have delivered tests for the software and, you know, they're covering this much of the code or so. So you can have some assessments that are maybe more quantitative or more precise, and others are more pass-fail. And usually for each of these iterations that I have shown you, for each of these little blocks here, I have one of these rubrics that say, this is what you have to deliver, and this is roughly how I will grade you. My experience is that less is more. So again, a typical reaction when you come from classical lecturing is that you try to be overly precise. That you go, okay, I have to grade them exactly on 0 to 100%, and how exactly do that? What I usually do is I try to be very open, and for me it's not, the grading on the project is not the most important thing. There should be some kind of grading, but it's not, I don't care that it's very precise. It's more about making sure they go through it and they have the experience, rather than being very, very precise in the grading. And again, that's why you need to have a mix. Some courses, maybe you need to be more precise. In my course, I have the project, but I also have an exam at the end, so I can check them on some other things. But the project, you know, I try to let go a little bit and say, I make sure everyone works, but I don't make sure everything has to be perfect or graded. Yeah.
I have a question. How many students do you usually deal with?
I have done these kind of courses from 20 to 250 students.
200?
Yep, 250. I have courses with 300.
Tell us a little bit about it. How is to do this with 200 students? I'm curious.
Yes. So in the courses with 200 students, I have a few TAs that help me, a few assistants. Okay. But we're talking 5. It's not 20 or so. It's 5 people. What I do is I have a lot of these kind of things. I have a lot of checkpoints that are just, is it there? Is it not there? Yes, no. Very easy to grade, very quick. So I try to reduce the effort there. I also try, since this is a class on software development, we use a lot of electronic tools where I can see if a student has delivered something or not. So that in case there are problems in the group, for example, the group complains that someone is not working, I can actually check. The other thing I'm using, which I haven't discussed before, is peer evaluation. So the students in the group, they need to assess whether the others have delivered things and whether it was okay, whether they have talked to each other and so on. So that the effort is not all on us for evaluating. And then in person, we actually only have 1 meeting per week where my TAs meet the different groups. And they play the role, they play a bit the manager or customer role. They come in now and then and say, okay, how's the progress? What do you do for next week? And so on. So that's how we deal with 200 students. I mean, these classes are really, really nice when you have 20 students and you can do it all yourself. But it is possible to scale this to some extent. I think you need to let go more of the grading and make sure there are things that are very easy to grade or even automatic. That's how you can do that with so many students.
One more question. How many people for each group?
5 to 9.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Lovely. It's almost like ours.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes.
Very similar.
Very
Yeah.
similar.
Yeah, yeah. It is a fairly international way of doing things. I think I've
Yeah.
seen very similar classes. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The questions were about the students, but I have a question about the instructors.
Yes.
Because when an instructor starts working with peer instruction or project-based learning or other active learning techniques, flip the classroom, I believe it's difficult for the instructor to change the way
Yes.
he teaches because the workload is great.
Yeah.
And the traditional lecture is in his head, so he must change the way.
Yes.
So do you have any suggestion how to change the mind of the instructor
Yes.
to use this kind of techniques?
It's very good that you asked this because that's my next topic.
Great.
So I'll just go. There are several ways, but one of them that I personally have worked with as a PhD student, actually, not as a professor, so I'm a bit on the other side, is team teaching as a way of changing things. So I'll just jump over there. If you still have the question, we can talk about it again later, but I think it's definitely one way of addressing things. So what we have done in certain classes, and I'll talk more about that, is to teach in the classroom. So we're standing in the classroom. Why can I not draw? Here. With two people. Okay, the legs are disappearing again, that's fine. And we have two people talking together at the same time sometimes, across each other. Why do we do this? The reason we do this is we have certain classes. For example, I had classes on software modeling where we draw diagrams. We, for example, design our systems, how they are connected and things like that. And this is a typical example of a topic where there is usually not a lot of feedback. When you program, the computer tells you if it works or not. In some other cases, if you maybe, you know, if you have an engineering class where you can do simulation, the computer tells you whether it's okay or not. In math, you sometimes have that. In a lot of topics like this one, you draw something. You can always draw something, it's not a problem. So how do I know whether it's good or not good? Is a very difficult discussion, and a lot of people say this is actually more like art. It's an art of designing software. It's not a science, and this kind of model of having multiple people that actually discuss what is going on in the class is a bit closer to what you have in the past in the apprenticeships. So, for example, if you learn to paint, you do that by going into a workshop and looking at what the master is doing. And then you do something and the master is commenting on, okay, this is maybe not the way of doing it. And this is exactly what we have here. We have one teacher that is basically the professor or the more experienced person, and we have someone who is a bit more like the apprentice. And the professor starts pretty much doing a lecture. Just, okay, we do this. This is the topic for today. And the apprentice pretty much plays the student that has no idea what's going on and starts asking questions. Starts going, okay, what did you do now? Why did you draw a line here? Does this make sense? And they start having a discussion. It's not necessarily the professor always telling them, this is how it works, this is how it's wrong. But they start having really a discussion, how you could do it differently and so on. And the reason we do this is for a lot of different ways. First, the apprentice down here is pretty much playing the role of the students. And a lot of times, he or she is actually asking questions that a lot of the students have in their heads. And maybe they don't want to ask, or they think they're stupid and everyone knows it. So a lot of the questions that that person asks are actually the things that maybe should be discussed. The professor, of course, makes mistakes as well. So maybe that's when the other person notices. And also it shows through the discussion, you find a way to discuss alternatives. Because otherwise, especially when it's an art, when it's not very exact, the students might get the impression that however the professor does it, it's exactly the one way to do it. There's no other option. So by discussing this, you get a bit of a broader picture, you get alternatives, and you actually verbalize what's going on in the head. Because if I'm doing math on the board, there's a lot going on in my head that maybe I'm not telling, I'm not saying, and maybe it's even automatic. So by having a discussion in the classroom, things become clearer. this helps a lot with understanding in the class, and some students really like it, some absolutely hate it because they really like the idea that there's one way of solving things and why do we have to have a discussion? But it also helps, and this is now where we get into how to change the mindset maybe. The discussions usually continue outside of the class as well between these two people. So what we did in our setup is that we had the professor who is responsible for the course, and we had a PhD student who was helping, who was like a TA in the course. And usually when we were done in class, we kept discussing, well, maybe we should be explaining this in a different way. Maybe we can do this kind of assignment. And our view on this was that it helps a lot with this kind of being stuck in one way of teaching. It's not only about the way of teaching, whether we do lectures or projects. It's also what I think most of us teachers have seen. When we teach a course 3-4 times, it becomes very hard to change anything. And that's, you know, if this person here, the apprentice, if they are a little bit either very open or they're a bit more experienced, they start questioning things and say, hey, should we really be doing this in that way? Is that a good idea? Maybe we should change it. So this has kind of happened accidentally. We started doing this with 2 people that were just discussing. They like to discuss a lot. But our experience is really that this helps a lot with developing courses over time. And this might also be a good way for example, developing project courses to actually put, for example, one person in the room who is more the expert on the topic and maybe someone else who is a bit more experienced with projects, and you start discussing things. I think the important thing about this topic is that there is this discussion going on. There is one setup of doing team teaching where it means one person is doing one lecture and the other person is doing another lecture. You often, for example, see that in medicine. You have a medicine course and one person is doing the lecture on cardiology. The other one is doing it on the nervous system, it's different areas. That's good for other reasons, but this setup that we are using is really on teaching everything together and discussing the course together so that the quality becomes better overall. So that's an approach we have used. Again, this is nothing that works in every single class. Yeah, it might work for some topics. And I don't know whether it answers your question, but I think it's one way that can actually help changing people a bit.
Let me
microphone
do a question here. A provocative question.
Yeah.
Sometimes, let's start with computer science. We change from the traditional way of developed systems to Scrum, and we don't have any Scrum leader.
Yeah.
We don't have, it's just working in a team.
Yes.
When we listen to some critics to the school, the professor used to be the owner of the class.
Yeah.
Don't you think this is kind of trying to broke this ownership to work more in a group? We are going to something more like Scrum than that with one person controlling everything?
It is, it's an interesting question, and I think we earlier discussed a bit hierarchy and kind of being formal. What we observed, or we haven't tried this with a lot of different people, what I think our theory is that you need to have someone who is in charge, the professor, who is very open to criticism. You cannot have this, this traditional lecturer who is like, I am in charge and the way I do it is right. So, of course, I think that's true for every kind of change. You need someone who is open enough that there can be someone like a young PhD student that says, well, I think this is wrong. We should maybe do this differently. I think it requires that. If you're really uncomfortable with that as a professor, then maybe you should not try that. It will not be good. Absolutely. And of course, just like with different trends, for example, in software development, I think it's a balance. You might realize that at some point you have gone too far and maybe you need to have some more control. What we often said is that the professor needs to be open to criticism, but also the professor needs to have kind of a script, an idea how the lecture will go, so that it doesn't just become a strange discussion and nothing else happens, but there needs to be some kind of plan. Okay, this is what we'll do. This is the examples we will discuss, and then you can improvise a bit. Yeah.
Thank you.
Parabéns pela forma de avaliação por rubrica, né? E vocês apresentam isso para o aluno logo de cara? Vocês vão ser avaliados, está todo mundo de acordo? Todos estão cientes que vai ser esse o método de avaliação? Eles têm dúvidas? Como que é essa receptividade dessa nova forma de avaliação que, embora você tenha automatizado, né, é uma dificuldade para a gente, muitas vezes, numa situação talvez presencial ou sem o recurso de um sistema com uma quantidade de alunos tão grande. Né? Extrapolando talvez um pouco o universo da Univesp, mas pensando mais no universo de trabalho dos nossos alunos, principalmente dos cursos de licenciatura, onde vão encontrar escolas com um número reduzido, 40 alunos aproximadamente, mas com recursos ou situações um pouco mais diferenciadas ou não tendo essa ferramenta de unificar, criar esse banco de dados de instrumento de avaliação. Como é que é feito isso? Como vocês apresentam isso para o aluno, então?
Okay, there I need a bit of translation. I think
okay, it's a long one. No, we're just talking about how you evaluate students.
Yep.
And then the main question is, how can you do if you present the rubrics in first, and if you have any kind of agreement with the students, and if you don't have lots of resources, we do have lots, like a classroom with 40 students, for example, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so one thing is these rubrics are open, so we always publish them to the students before, so they know what they are evaluated on. And of course, that always comes with the risk that they just optimize for exactly what we grade on. I think that's what you have to live with. That's why very often we just grade on what we want them to do. We don't maybe care so much about all the details of how well they do it. Regarding the scaling, or how do we deal with a lot of students, I think I would try to at least automate part of these things. Mm-hmm. So as I said earlier, for example, we use systems where we see every single contribution. And I think one way would be to actually automate how much contributions do there need to be, and those kind of things that we actually don't have to manually do anything, but it could be graded in an automatic way. Again, it's never perfect. It's not a great way of grading, but that's the trade-off of having lots of students. So I think I would really try to automate a large part of the grading, and then maybe really have a few things that you really care about, but those you can really grade manually, you can manage. But I haven't tried it, so I would have to see.
Maybe we can have an experience together.
Yeah.
That's the beginning.
Okay. Then I'll just very quickly jump to the last topic, I think, and that's fine because that's ongoing work, so I can just talk a bit about what we have done. So this is a slightly different angle because it's not about how we teach, it's about how we support certain types of students, and that's in our case neurodivergent students, so students that have conditions like autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or dyslexia, for example, so issues with usually reading comprehension. And what I'm doing here is probably not great for them, by the way. But there we have just started a lot of work in how we actually help with our courses. And we have done some initial work that is very simple because the main idea is how can we do it without a lot of resources. We don't have a lot of support for these kind of people. So it's not like I have 5 people that can help me with different things. So it's up to me. And what I have done in an initial round is, first of all, that we have changed the look, the presentation, the style of our slides, of our assignment texts and material that we offer. And we have done that following a lot of different guidelines that exist for these conditions. And it's usually things like, having a different background. White is not fantastic. having different fonts, different font size, more space, and things like that. Also, when it comes to our assignments, for example, we have really tried to carefully go through them a lot of times and make sure we have them in the right wording. It's very clear what you have to do and improve the clarity, basically. Because, for example, that's something people with ADHD very often struggle with. You give them a lot of different instructions and they're just lost where to start. This is difficult because it very much clashes with this idea here that you have very open problems. So how we cannot be very specific because we want to leave it very open. And this is something we try to work with, but we don't have a great solution for that right now. But we have mainly worked on this level, and so far this has been really successful. So the students at Reykjavik University have been quite positive about that. We have, in terms of numbers, we have about 10% of students that have one of these conditions. So it's quite a large number, even though the one does not want to stay on here. Whatever, 10%. So they were quite positive, and now we are working on the next rounds of this. So we're trying to look at, can we make our organization better, how to find materials, how to maybe guide people through the different courses. So it's really at an initial stage, but the focus is very much on how do we do this in a simple way. Because again, we have talked, for the different topics, we have talked about how do we convince people to do things. And of course, you can either have a department or a group that really focuses on having this support, but that's not what we have. So we have to convince individual teachers, this is how you can make your class better, more accessible, more inclusive. And this is roughly where we are at the moment. But we're looking at different ways how to improve presentation, organization, and topics like that. But it's not, it's not like we are building amazing tools at the moment. It's very basic support. And a lot of it is also just about awareness, making these people more seen, that they exist, and that the other students also acknowledge that, and that the teachers understand that, and that's pretty much the level where we are. So that's definitely a topic where we can still learn a lot, and I think you at Univesp are also doing a lot already in that direction, which we are not very good at, so ongoing work. Any questions on this or on anything I've been talking about? Or yeah.
Tenho várias questões, deixa eu pensar uma.
What's the time?
Lots of questions.
Yeah.
Lots of questions. How about evaluation in these cases? If you perform the same evaluation considering neurodiversity.
Yeah.
Also, I would like to ask you to tell us a case.
Yeah.
A difficult case.
So evaluation first, maybe.
Thank you.
Currently, according to our university rules, these students, the only official support they get is that they get longer time for the exams. So there's kind of a guaranteed time, I think it's 25% usually, that you have more time. That's currently what the university does. Then on the lecturer side, we have a lot of flexibility what we can do. And I would say at the moment we actually don't do a lot. So there's not much difference in how we evaluate, partially because we're only starting to learn about this. And also because it's very difficult, of course, depending on the condition and the detailed severity of the condition. There's a huge difference in how they behave, how they perform certain tasks. Some cases, maybe if I do software testing, someone with autism might be better. So should I evaluate them harder or not? So I think we're only just learning these things. But we're having a lot of discussions in the context of, for example, the projects. And other kind of skills that we know are often difficult for some of these students. So for example, a lot of people with autism have issues in group work because of communication, social skills. And there we are having really a discussion about should we change the setup for them or not? Because we know they have difficulties, but we also know they'll have to deal with it in the industry later. So it's a tricky discussion. I can tell you one case, not from us, but from another university in Iceland. because I've recently talked to a lot of the different study counselors in the universities. What they do when they have project courses with autistic students is they still have to do the project, but they usually get a smaller setup. So instead of being in a group of 5, 6 people, they get paired up with one other student, and then they just work together with them. And their experience is that this works extremely well, and usually these two form really, really strong connections. And that's usually one autistic person and one non-autistic person. And that seems to work, so it's a good example maybe of some kind of middle way. But it's something we keep discussing. Concrete cases, I think in the recent years it's quite difficult because of COVID, so I don't have very direct interaction, but I can tell you about a couple of difficulties that come up maybe. One very interesting case that we looked at, well, we looked at what we did, the kind of changes in the slides and so on, but we also asked what else can we do? We just asked the students. And we had one student that said, COVID is really nice because I can be at home, I can focus on the lectures, it's silent, all is nice. Another student said, COVID is really difficult for me because when I'm at home, my brain tells me I have to relax. So I think it's two examples of that show how difficult this is, and that show that we will probably not find overall solutions that solve all of this, but it's more about trying to understand what we need to offer or how flexible we need to be. So there's no easy way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
More questions? Okay. Se você falar em português devagar.
Tá bom. Você citou como um instrumento de avaliação as rubricas, né? Eu queria saber, além dos instrumentos, o que exatamente você avalia do processo, né? Por exemplo, se existe uma avaliação sobre essas habilidades de socialização, se existem outros aspectos além da entrega do projeto, né, que você tem como critério na hora de avaliar.
Okay, so he's asking about if you evaluate or not the social skills. When you have a group, you have the deliveries, and then you have the project itself, but how do they do if they are participating, mostly behavior and...
Yeah. Do you evaluate not only the project,
the
result?
No, we don't. It's
soft skills, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So there is soft skills are difficult.
So it's social skills, okay.
Yeah, no, but even that, I mean, even social skills, right? Because, some people are maybe better than others in communicating. Is that something we should grade them on or not? I think what we try to do, so quick answer is we don't evaluate them on that. The longer answer is we try to support them in developing that. So, for instance, I mentioned earlier that we do this kind of peer evaluation, that the students grade each other and they say this student has participated, and we don't really use this to grade. We don't say, well, everyone says you are not working, so you fail. But when we see that something is going on, we see the group says there is a person that does not participate, we actually sit down with the group and we discuss these issues. And that's also, there was one question earlier of how we deal with 200 students. I think that's the other situation where we actually go into the class and we sit down with the groups and we do these kind of things. In Sweden, where I was before, we had in parallel to a lot of the project courses, there was a mandatory course where they were teaching and learning a lot about social and soft skills. So that's another way. I think we can do a lot better still in supporting this. I'm not sure grading or evaluating is the best way, but I think there should be more support at least. And that's also where we have a long way to go.
Okay, that's perfect. More questions?
Do you think this could be a trend not to focus on the content, but focus in soft skills and trying to...
Yes. So I haven't mentioned this here, but currently I'm evaluating one of our bachelor programs, and as a part of that I'm interviewing a lot of students and I'm interviewing a lot of companies in Iceland. And the trend I see in Iceland, and I don't know how that is here, but I know that it's similar in, for example, in Sweden, is the companies are looking for people that know the basic skills, and they know some of, the principles, a bit of the theory, and they are really good at working in teams. I very rarely hear companies that say, we want them to know all these technical different things, all the details. No, they want the basics, they want people that are flexible and easy to integrate in the work life. So I think it is getting more and more important. Also, of course, now we are discussing a lot of things like ChatGPT and so on. I think the very technical skills will get less important. Other things will get a lot more important. So I definitely see a trend there. Again, I believe in the mix. I don't think we should stop completely evaluating some of the more technical, deep skills, but currently we're maybe too much on the technical side, and we need to get a bit more to the non-technical, social team side. Yeah.
Lovely, perfect. Questions? No? So, I'll just go in Portuguese for a while.
Sure.
Bom, tá. A gente teve um bate-papo até agora com o nosso pesquisador. E aí, eu estou olhando para todo o público. Nós temos os alunos da Univesp, os professores da Univesp e público em geral. Mas eu queria me direcionar um pouquinho para você, que é aluno da Univesp, aproveitar que nós estamos todos aqui juntos. Existe alguma similaridade no que o Grisha acabou de dizer com o nosso projeto integrador? Tá? Para a gente é um prazer muito grande poder receber um pesquisador e a gente entender, né, que hoje na Univesp nós temos todo um esforço para trabalhar junto com vocês. E eu tenho aqui a professora Mônica Garbin, que foi uma das idealizadoras do projeto integrador, para que vocês entendam de fato a importância, primeiro, que a gente tem buscado nos nossos projetos para entregas de produto, para poder fazer as nossas transformações sociais, para a gente poder trazer uma movimentação e você ir para a prática, certo, Mônica? Eu acho que essa é a primeira coisa. E também a ideia, e às vezes a gente ouve o aluno ficar bravo, professora, mas eu quero fazer meu trabalho sozinho. Né? E o Grisha acabou de falar, gente, tem que interagir, essa é uma das maiores habilidades que a gente precisa. E aí, Mônica, eu queria saber se você quer completar alguma coisa, porque acho que agora é muito um olho no olho com o nosso aluno da Univesp nesse momento.
Então, Simone, eu acho que é importante a gente dizer que o nosso projeto integrador, então, ele está usando o PBL, que é o que ele acabou de apresentar para a gente, e a gente vê o mundo inteiro, então, usando, né, que eu acho que isso é bom a gente deixar aqui registrado para o nosso aluno, que a gente está usando uma metodologia ativa que é utilizada em muitas universidades do mundo, né? Então, pensar que a gente está aí andando naquilo que está acontecendo ao redor, né?
Desde o nascimento da Univesp.
Exato, exatamente.
Nasceu assim, né?
Desde 2014 a gente usa, né, as metodologias ativas, a gente usa o PBL, o Design Thinking, né, no projeto integrador. Então, a gente está usando metodologias que são utilizadas, né, no mundo inteiro, enfim. Aqui a gente está vendo um exemplo, né, mas são metodologias que estão sendo usadas. Então, a Univesp está andando aí, né, em paralelo com o que está acontecendo no mundo. Eu acho que isso é muito importante da gente registrar, porque a Univesp nasce pensando em ser uma universidade inovadora, uma universidade que usa metodologias ativas, que usa as tecnologias para aprendizagem. E eu gosto muito, quando eu escuto, né, em palestras, em diversos lugares, de ver que a gente está no caminho certo. Né?
Perfeito. Alguém quer falar mais alguma coisa, gente? Tá?
Deixa eu
Por favor,
só completar
Marcos.
aqui, né, que eu fiz um conjunto de entrevistas com RHs de empresas 2 anos atrás, né, e o que eu mais ouvi de empresas da área de TI é que nós contratamos por conhecimento técnico, porque é o mais fácil de avaliar, mas nós demitimos por soft skills. Então, acho que é importante a gente entender isso. A gente precisa preparar os nossos alunos para não ser demitidos por soft skills.
Sim. E eu acho que cada vez mais os nossos desafios aqui, porque assim, apesar de a gente estar do outro lado da tela, tá, gente? A gente observa vocês, observa com muito carinho, né? E a gente entende aquela dor, aquele desespero, mas a gente também faz a proposta para vocês, que é para a gente poder aprender a trabalhar com isso, né? Porque assim, não é todo dia, eu já dei vários exemplos. Quantas vezes entre nós aqui, time da Univesp, a gente não discute, a gente não discorda, a gente fica bravo um com o outro. Quantas vezes, mas... Ó a cara, ó. E a gente procura utilizar exatamente das mesmas estratégias, entendeu? Que é buscar, a partir da nossa maturidade profissional, isso. E tem um outro ponto que eu queria só enfatizar, que é o trabalho que a Univesp faz com acessibilidade, né? A gente tem ali as nossas professoras que estão assistindo à distância também. A gente tem muito orgulho desse trabalho que a gente faz, não só de toda a adaptação com material didático, mas hoje as salas especiais, as atividades individualizadas, principalmente para alunos que têm autismo, enfim, mas a gente trabalha com todas as necessidades, então é um orgulho para a gente dizer isso para vocês, tá? Que a Univesp é uma universidade de ponta, inclusiva e, enfim, que esse time maravilhoso que vocês estão vendo aqui é que constrói essa universidade. Um outro ponto importante é para você que é professor, né? Da Univesp ou não Univesp, porque toda vez que a gente...
Futuros professores.
Futuros professores também, né? O que acontece, tá? Todo mundo pergunta para a gente como é que vocês têm trabalhado com projetos. Eu acho que esse é um bom caminho, né? Pegar do comecinho ali a palestra, esse nosso bate-papo com o Grisha, entrar em contato com a gente. A Univesp está sempre de portas abertas para mostrar como que a gente trabalha com projetos, tá? Então, para a gente é uma satisfação muito grande. E mais alguma coisa, gente? Marcos?
Só falar aqui com os nossos futuros professores, né? Os nossos alunos são futuros professores. A educação precisa melhorar. A gente está vendo aqui tipo de coisa que a gente precisa levar para a nossa sala de aula. Tá? Isso é para ontem, gente. A educação no Brasil precisa melhorar para ontem, então a gente conta com vocês para ajudar a revolucionar o ensino no Brasil. Acho que a gente tem alguns exemplos interessantes aqui.
E eu acho que quando o Marcos fala isso também, aproveitar, o Grisha falou agora há pouco, da gente ser irreverente e a gente inovar. Então, você que é o nosso futuro professor, aluno de licenciatura, você participou o seu curso inteiro de um projeto integrador. Leva isso para a sua sala, vamos mudar, né? Vamos fazer diferente, tá? Bom, eu acho que agora a gente está no momento da gente se despedir. Então, primeiro, eu gostaria de agradecer a todo o time da Univesp TV, aos nossos professores que estão online, a esse time maravilhoso que está aqui, tá? Que nós temos uma mistura, tem aqui o nosso apresentador da Univesp TV, o presidente, pessoal da imprensa, pessoal de arte, criação, a Mônica que é docente, o Bruno que vem só de vez em quando, né? Mas que está sempre por trás ali da regulação e avaliação, enfim, todo o nosso time Univesp também que está assistindo. And our teacher, let's say like that. So thank you so much. It was really lovely and precious. The moment we could interact, it was not a lecture because we interacted. So it's a pleasure to have you here. We hope you have enjoyed your stay at Univesp. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Então, até breve. Nos vemos num próximo programa.